I like.
And so it's being driven in a large part by, can I profit from this? So what I've done is I'm trying to think about a 20-year plan that works backwards from Holodecks. And part of that is, how do I create an ecosystem that will be supportive of this kind of breakthrough? And in my mind, this region, the Middle East, whether it's Dubai or Abu Dhabi or Saudi Arabia or any of the, the states in this region that are bullish on gaming, to me, I found a willing participant to help realize this vision. That's how I saw it, right? Because in the West, when you're dealing with business, you're constrained by what you can do in business. The beauty of operating here is you have governments who have conviction, who have religion about gaming, and are willing to invest, hopefully, in the long-term play. Not the, what is the GDP contribution next year? Well, that's important, but it's, how do we build $1 trillion business in Abu Dhabi, for example, in 10 years? That's the exciting part. So what have I done? I think a large part for me since then was two things. One was evangelism, which I think is important and is not done enough. In other words, how do I tell that story to enough people and get them to see my vision and get them to join my side? Because I can't do this alone. I need 1,000 smart people, 10,000 smart people, 100,000 smart people to realize, oh yeah, this thesis makes sense. I can get on board with that. How can I help build that? How can I contribute? So evangelism was important. And I started this even when I was in the US with a podcast.
Okay, cool.
How do I start talking about the business side of gaming and getting people excited about it? How do I open people's eyes who maybe they thought gaming was just a thing teenagers did in their basement, and get them to start thinking about it, investing in it, talking about it? And so the initial opening that I saw was, no one is talking about the business side of gaming in an insightful way. It was journalists who know nothing about gaming or know nothing about business, one or the other. And so what insight am I getting from that journalist who's going to tell me what this merger between these two studios means for the future of gaming? They can't. So that was the first opening, the first white space I moved into, which was, okay, I can start controlling the narrative a little bit. I can start inspiring people. I can start getting my vision out to the world. And so content and media was that very first play. That is what a lot of what I've done over the last few years, last many years now, was content. Today I host a show on CNBC Arabia. It has a very large audience in this region. I'm very proud of that show. I think it really serves the purpose of winning hearts and minds.
Yeah.
So that evangelism and that content and that media piece is a big part of what I've done in that time frame. I think the second thing is really working with the major players, whether that's big gaming companies, small gaming companies, governments, to get people on board on a path that leads me to that holodeck future. And that's not always easy, because if you try selling people today on holodecks, you will lose, you will get the visionaries, but you will lose the bureaucrat who's maybe working in government. So you have to go step by step, right? And so step one is, okay, how can we build really smart programs, for example, in governments to support gaming companies and gaming technologies? How can we build programs to create dense gaming ecosystems? How can we create the building blocks of what becomes that holodeck future? And so that evangelism morphs into almost government lobbying, where it's working with governments, working with major players to try and get them on this path towards success. And I would say I've done that to some success, because working with government is tricky.
Yeah.
But
I'm getting into this.
But this is where there's still a lot of work to be done. In this region, governments are all, we know the Saudis are spending billions, 38 billion to be exact. Abu Dhabi has spent a lot of money. Dubai has a program for gaming now. RAC is thinking about gaming. The free zones are thinking about have gaming programs or gaming centers. And so we're getting to this point where at some point you hit this critical mass where there's enough momentum, enough energy, enough people moving in the same direction. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of time to get there.
Yeah, that was my next question. Apart from different questions I wanted to touch on, we will get back to those. But knowing that you've been part of an investment vehicle in North America, specifically I think in Canada and in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
How and now you're part of, or you're close to people who are part of setting ecosystems or trying to create ecosystems.
Yeah.
How would you compare your experience in North America versus your experience here? And where would you say you are positioned in this region as compared to North America in terms of creating ecosystems? I'm not sure if you've been part of gaming or the games business in North America, but if you were, how do we compare in terms of the policies that we have here in the region versus over there, as well as the talent, the investment vehicles, the money, like, across the board?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of my earliest experience in Canada was building the tech and startup ecosystem that exists there today. I'm very proud of that a lot of that exists because of the work I did in the early 2000s to build those ecosystems that exist there. That was not trivial. It required government support. It required private sector support. It required a lot of people moving in the same direction. I coined a term at the time that people have adopted called density of intensity, which is what I believe you need to build a successful ecosystem. You need enough intensity all moving in the same direction at sufficient density for good things to happen. And that Canadian experience is what I've leaned on over the years in terms of thinking about other ecosystems, including here. And, the fund I managed in Canada was a product of the realization that the government could not do all of this on their own. They needed to put capital in the hands of the private sector. And part of that was to spur startups to come there. But you have to create an ecosystem for those startups to thrive. It's not enough just to give them money or give them subsidies. By the way, I invented subsidies for startups right, in Canada. The SR&ED credits that still exist to this day, right, 25 years later, was something I created and has been copied by governments and ecosystems all over the world.
Well, what is it for those who are watching that don't know?
Well, it's a subsidy where that said, basically, if you were doing anything you could remotely categorize as R&D, which could have been a developer, which could have been anything that was technology, basically, the government, if you paid that person $100,000 a year, the government would return you $50,000 at the end of the year, essentially as a subsidy, to cover the cost of doing what they felt was important work in Canada. And it was a way of being competitive with the US. So what you had was a lot of US companies even who realized we could put a bunch of developers in Canada, even in the games industry. Why do you think Ubisoft ended up with a huge game studio in Montreal? A lot of it was driven by media credits, SR&ED credits, government support that allowed for much cheaper development with very highly talented people still, and made it very competitive. And so it's not something that happened overnight though, right? Like the startup ecosystem that exists in Silicon Valley took 50 years to build to what it is today, essentially. The startup ecosystem that exists in Canada, I'll argue 20, 25 years. The challenge is, this part of the world, everyone wants to do it in 3.
Yeah, shortcuts.
And money solves some of those problems, but not all of those problems. And so you need the patience. You need the conviction over a long period of time. You need the commitment over a long period of time. You need the talent. You need the right programs. You need all of these elements. It's really a holistic view that I think is what fascinates me about ecosystem building. There's not one silver bullet. An investment program doesn't create an ecosystem. An academy for talent doesn't create an ecosystem. A great one successful startup doesn't create an ecosystem. But you start putting all those elements together, and that's what happened in Canada in the early 2000s, right? You had Research in Motion with BlackBerry, was a huge success. All of a sudden puts Canada on the startup map. Governments implement subsidies and tax credits, puts Canada on the map. They start messaging the US, hey, we're open for business, puts Canada on the map. And all of a sudden, talent starts to flow in. Smart people start to flow in. There's an opportunity to make money. There's an opportunity to build interesting things there. And it happens over time. but you can't leave one of those things out.
Mm.
And that's what has to happen here. And I lean on that experience of building that tech ecosystem in Canada. To me, it's no different. Building the gaming ecosystem here, I use the same model I use there.
But don't you think it could be, or it was a bit more organic in Canada? In terms
No.
of talent flow? Oh, no.
No,
Okay.
it was very conscious. Really was. A lot of these were programs I either helped create or was involved in creating.
Mm.
It was very much an active thing. Like, before me, no Canadian VCs blogged.
Yeah.
I started doing this not because I cared about being famous. I started doing this because I wanted to evangelize to the world that Canada was a great place to build a startup. And these were the reasons why. And so, yes, some of it's organic and you need some luck also, right?
Yeah,
Like,
definitely.
you get these huge successful startups, not like you can do everything right and still have no successes.